Welcome to the Wisdom of Show. I'm your host, Simon Bowen, and every week I'm speaking to the world's greatest leaders, thinkers, and entrepreneurs about complex issues and impactful leadership. Join us in the Renaissance of Wisdom. Well, welcome to the Wisdom of, and I'm so excited about this episode. I'm about to interview an Australian icon in the sporting world, in media. She's actually a national treasure. She would be most embarrassed hearing me talk about that because it's not what she's like at all. For those of you that are outside of Australia watching this, Liz Ellis has been one of our most successful netball players. For those of you from other parts of the world that have competed against Australia in netball, you absolutely know who she is. And I've had the privilege of being able to talk to Liz about this notion of wisdom and leadership in the past. And I just knew she was the right guest for the Wisdom of Show. You know, we live in, as I say at the start of every episode, an increasingly superficial world. People are obsessed by the quick fix, the tricks, the hacks, and yet real contribution starts at a much, much deeper level. We certainly have social, political, economic challenges, and we're at a time where we need great leadership in a world where maybe leadership is drifting. And so I'm so excited, Liz, to welcome you to the episode, for us to have the chance to talk about wisdom and leadership and maybe leave some nuggets for leaders coming through, because the world needs great leaders now more than ever before, possibly.
Thanks, Simon. It's great to be here.
I want to go through your bio a little bit because I know this will be extremely uncomfortable for you, but you know it's important for people to understand. I mean, in terms of your playing career, you know, 3 World Championship gold medals, 2 Commonwealth Game medals, and 4 national premierships with the Sydney Swifts in Australia. You're one of the highest profile athletes when you played, captained the Australian Netball Team, 15 continuous seasons at the elite level of sport. I mean, apart from the toll on the body, the mental focus and clarity and commitment that it takes, World Cup victory in 2007. It's an extraordinary pathway in terms of sport, and then post-sport in the media. I think the 2000 and 2004 Olympics, 2006, 2010, 2014 Commonwealth Games. As a commentator, you're a regular commentator on sport. You've even been on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And I think Australia just fell in love with you in a whole other way. And I had conversations with people saying, why can't she be the Prime Minister? Because you were just sharing this wisdom with people on this show that's kind of entertainment, right? But lots of deep stuff gets talked about, and so many other things. You're a member of the Order of Australia and then elevated to the officer of the Order of Australia. And I know that in recent times you've taken up the role as chair of Netball Australia, really kind of at the request of the sport, for leadership. And I know it's taking up a lot of your time and energy. You're driving a national sport, and there's so much more, but it's really an extraordinary range of experience across a whole different sets of fields of performance, from someone who you said to me in the past, I wasn't even that sporty in school. I wasn't that girl. As you hear that back, how does that feel every time you hear back that story and think about this journey that you've actually been on?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I think when I think about the journey that I've been on, and when I was a little kid, my mum got asked if I wanted to play netball, and her first reaction was no. I don't think Liz would like a team sport, and she likes her books, and I don't think sport's for her. And there was a woman called Sheila Ether who was putting together a netball team, and really her purpose was to get as every kid either playing, girls played netball and boys played rugby league. She had 5 kids. She had boys and girls, and every boy she met, she tried to get them into rugby league teams, and every girl she met, she tried to get them into netball. And, she really lived that purpose. And I often say to people, if you find a purpose that means something to you, it really drives you in the direction you take. So this woman wouldn't take no for an answer from my mum, and Kate went away and thought about a way to get to yes, and eventually talked mum into letting me play netball, and really the rest is history. But I do often think of her, and I think, thank goodness for her perseverance and for her not taking no for an answer, and for her being really driven by her purpose, because she was someone who didn't have a badge that said manager or mayor or leader or captain or anything like that. But she was a real leader in the community because, she had a really clear purpose, and she drove to that purpose every single day, every single kid she met. So, I've got a lot to be thankful for, that she was really in the orbit of my mum and sort
Yeah.
of pushed mum into letting me play netball.
Well, had you not had that strength of influence from someone who's really purpose driven, I mean, interesting statement, find a purpose that drives you. What path do you think things might have taken had you not found netball in the way that you did?
Yeah, I don't know. And I do often think about it, and I get asked about it, I guess, because, I combined the early years of my netball career with university, and I got a law degree, and I practiced for Cause Chambers Westgarth in their property and infrastructure division. And um, I never really fully committed to that career because I always had my eye on my netball career. And, I thought when I started that I could do both. I could make partner and I could captain the Australian netball team. It turns out in the Venn diagram of those two careers, there is no overlap. So, I had to make a choice. So I don't know, perhaps I would have, gone down the legal path and had a legal career, with Cause or elsewhere. But then I do wonder if the fact that I had the confidence to be the first person in my family to go to university and to bowl up to a large law firm and say, yeah, here we go, give me a job. That really did stem from the fact that I had this sporting background that gave me confidence. And it's one of the things I think with my sport that we do very well. And I've started to make sure that we talk about it, and I do want us to start to measure it, because I think it's a huge impact that netball has and that all team sports has. But netball is really unique in the fact that it grows confidence, and it grows confident girls and confident women. And um, would I have continued down sort of that legal career? Probably, but I don't know if I would have had the confidence to even pursue that if I didn't have netball at the start. So, I grew up in Western Sydney. I didn't have corporate high flyers in my circle for me to look at and emulate, and it was really only through my sport that I met people who were leaders, and whether it's politics or sport or business, and women in particular, and I started to think that I could potentially do that.
So if you think about, there's a wide range: sport, media, business, um, governance now at board level, politics. You've because of your sporting success and profile and media, you get to mix with and meet with and influence at a lot of levels. What are there any themes amongst leaders, like great leaders, that you've interacted with, where if we had to summarize, that great leaders believe that the real purpose is dot dot dot, like it could be to make money, it could be to drive a political agenda, but underneath all of that, is there a common purpose that great leaders somehow seem to subscribe to? I know it's an out there kind of question, but
Yeah, I don't know that there's a common purpose. I think I would say that the great leaders that I've met have been really clear about their purpose and have real clarity in what their purpose is and what their priorities is, and what their priorities are. And I think the thing about leadership is that it's difficult and it can be lonely. And you learn that the first time you put in a leadership position where it's you, and you go, oh my goodness, if something goes wrong, I've got no one else to blame. I'm where the buck stops. And that's can be a really lonely position. And the decisions and the things that you have to address are often really difficult, because the easy stuff gets done down the chain and the difficult stuff gets passed up to the leaders to make the decisions on. But I think if you have clarity about your purpose and you're clear about your priorities, those decisions become a little bit easier. And I think the moment you step into a leadership position, you actually have to spend time reflecting about, does this change my purpose? Your purpose might be to make money, but it's not going to make you a great leader. There has to be something a
yeah.
bit deeper than that. And I think, making money might be a priority, and I don't think we should shy away from that. But if you want to lead, it means you've got to lead other people, and making yourself rich isn't going to really inspire other people. If your purpose is to make everybody around you better off, then that's a completely different purpose than just making money for yourself. So I think it's just being really clear about your purpose, and and just taking time to think about what success might look like. And I think the best leaders that I've met are leaders who actually listen. If I'm going to be sort of really honest, I think you meet people who are in leadership positions and all they want to do is talk, and all they want to do is tell you about themselves or their story, and often they've earned the right to, and potentially, the fact that they get asked to do podcasts like this, you can default to the fact that, oh, I must be really interesting and have plenty to say. But the best leaders are leaders who listen to the people around them, and you don't have to take all the advice that you give them, but you need to find the other smart people, or people who you trust, and listen to them. And I think listening is a really underrated component of leadership.
Sure. And so if we think about team sport is interesting because it does teach confidence, but also teaches values. It teaches this ability to move in the collective in a synchronized way that often has to actually be intuitive in the moment on the field of play. Like, how does that magic happen in that amount of time? And so when you think about teams and values, there's many values, but at that high performance level, what are some of the most important values if we had to list two or three? And we said, what matters most is blah, blah, blah. What springs to mind for you?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you a little story. When I became captain of the Australian Netball Team, I knew that we had to really clearly define who we were. And I think, we'd been through a period of, we'd lost the World Cup, then we lost the Commonwealth Games. We were getting pumped in test matches that we had never happened before. We're losing games that we shouldn't have. And I felt that we actually didn't really know what we stood for and who we were. And so we spent some time in the lead up to the World Cup really defining, I don't know if they're values, but we really wanted to define what we stood for. And so we came up with a sentence, which was, the Australian Netball Team is proud, united and relentless. And they were the three things. But we realised pretty shortly that anyone can write a sentence. The Silver Ferns could have written a sentence. The English Netball Team could have written a sentence. The Jamaicans could have written the same sentence. What matters is the behaviours that you put underneath. And so we defined a series of behaviours that we felt really lived those three things, proud, united, relentless. And one of the core ones around relentless was, what are you doing when no one else is looking? And that's about integrity. So I think integrity is a real key value in any team. And for me, I think that sort of stands out in any situation, whether you're in business, you're in sport, politics. It's a word that's easy to say, but it's much harder to live, because sometimes you really do have to make difficult decisions or do difficult things. So integrity, I think it's a real key value. And for us also, being relentless was about just sticking to the game plan. So, I think in any team, integrity is a really clear value. And the other thing that we did with this sentence and then the values was think about accountability. And we allowed everybody to be accountable, whether to call other people to account. So whether it was me as captain, the coach, the vice captain, or the youngest member of the squad who'd been around for 10 minutes, they were able to call anyone to account who wasn't living, these behaviours. And we did that in a way, we gave everyone the language to use, and so that you knew that if someone was calling to you to account, they weren't attacking you, they were actually trying to make the team better. So to me, that's respect. So I think integrity and respect are two things that sit as really high values, because you've got to, as a leader, you've got to not only have the respect of the people around you, and you earn that respect through your actions and through, being really clear about your purpose. But I think you need to respect those around you as well who are trying to contribute to the team. And I think, integrity and respect are probably the two things that really stand out to me as values that are almost, you can't not have them in a successful team, and you can't not have those as a successful leader.
So it's interesting, for anyone outside of Australia, Liz has also rattled off the three biggest competitors the Australian women's netball team with New Zealand, England and Jamaica.
Jamaica.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that's normally, where the head-to-head goes. So there was obviously a lot of feeling in that when you were talking about
Yeah,
that.
there
But
was, right. And so if you're going to be a successful team, you can't, like, anyone can have words, anyone can write a sentence. It's actually what comes next that's important.
of course, and values are interesting because what you've actually just outlined is culture, and every company could learn from that. But values are interesting. There are baseline values that everyone has the right to expect from individuals and from the collective, and integrity and respect are two of them. You have the right to expect when you go to a company integrity and respect, and the company has the right to expect that from you. These are baseline values, right? But then the Australian netball team then defined three values that are unique to the team: proud,
United and relentless.
united, and relentless. Right? These are not common words used, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they are the unique qualifying values of the team. And so therefore, how are we going to behave underneath that? I mean, anyone in business listening to this, just think about that for a second. So if you've got trust, honesty, respect, integrity on the walls in your office, is that defining who you uniquely are as a company, or is it just saying this is baseline?
Mm-hmm.
We expect that, and everyone should expect that of us. But here's what makes us unique. Values are a really interesting space to play in. And having watched you on TV, I'm a celebrity. It's just you you do live those values that you'd obviously became hardwired as a part of a professional elite sport career. You can see that when you show up, and I'm sure that's what's happening now with Netball Australia. You've taken over as the chair of the board for Netball Australia. It's like you're entering a new team again, having to, who are we going to be? How are we going to show up? And it's a constant challenge. The leader is that lonely person who's challenging everybody else about how we're going to show up in the collective. That's quite a challenging thing. What are some of the differences that you've noticed? I mean, elite sport is a great example of how teams work. Then there are and it's a great learning field for business, for charities, for boards, not for profits. What are some of the differences that you've noticed where, okay, I learned all this in sport, but here are some extra things I've had to acquire in my skill set or in my sort of concepts and contexts as I've stepped into the business world and media and everything else? What are some of the differences that you've noticed?
I think one of the big things is when you're in a professional or any sort of sporting team, it's really clear what you're working towards. Like, you're working towards a World Cup or you're working towards
Yeah.
a grand final, and your season is really defined. And so you're actually working within something that's obvious, and that who your competitors are. They've all got names and they all turn up and they're in the draw. And, like, there's no one coming out of nowhere that oh my God, I didn't even know that team existed, right? Whereas you go into business or politics or charity or anything like that, where you're outside that really structured environment, all these things can happen. You can have disruptors, you can have you don't really know when your grand final is. You don't really know when the big pressure games are coming. You might be able to define some of them because you might know that at the end of the financial year, things get a bit hairy. And when you're in reporting season, things get a bit hairy. But, like, there's not a grand final or a draw, or there's not that structure in business. And so when you step out of sport, you actually have to learn how to operate in a bit more of a chaotic environment, because it's really difficult then to define success. Because in a sports team, you have you start the year and that on the 15th of August, you'll know whether you've been successful or not, because you will have won the grand final or not. And if you haven't even made finals, then you'll know before. And business is a little bit different. Yeah, there's the financial reporting, but not every business is defined wholly and solely by its financial goals. There's a number of other goals. And I think the thing that I have tried to bring into business is to say, well, how are we defining success? And how are we going to celebrate our success, right? Because sometimes we do forget to celebrate, whereas teams that I've been in have been very good at celebrating our end of season. And I've been in teams where we haven't won. We've been appalling, and we've had to go away through in the middle of the season and redefine what success looks like. And that's much easier to do in a team because you have a measurement every week. You have a game every week to see how you're going. And when you get into the business world, it's far more fluid about, well, when are we going to measure success? We're going to do it every week? Are we going to do it every month or 6 months or quarterly? How's it going to be? And what are we looking at other than the financial figures to define how we are successful? Because if you're trying to build a successful culture, it's more than just the money. It's a number of other things, or, what your product looks like, or, there's so many different things to take into account. But I think when you're leading in a field that's not sport, being able to define where your success markers are, what defines your success, how you're going to measure it, and how you're going to celebrate it is really important.
Yeah, and we live in an increasingly complex world where people are demanding greater stewardship from business. So profit by itself doesn't carry for no one wakes up every morning and thinks, wow, I'm going to go off to work today and help make somebody else wealthy. It's just not a thought process people have, right? But people do want business and government and enterprise to make a difference in a positive way. I think we're living in a world where people want a much greater level of stewardship from our organizations. And so for leaders in a chaotic environment, what does that success look like? What's that pre-definition of success that is beyond just profit? Planet and people and so on. How many other ways can we contribute? Which is kind of fascinating, and also uniquely challenging, right? Let's talk about chaos for a moment. I mean, it was an interesting observation that in sport you have this very structured, we go to here and this many events leading up to the World Championship or whatever, and I suppose the most chaotic thing in the middle of that would be injury. That the thing that's going to throw you off is injury or illness running through the team or whatever.
Yeah, or something that happens in a game, right? So once you hit your game moment, there's an hour and a half of sort of chaos. You can do all your prep and you know what your game plan is, but the surprises come with the opposition and what they do to you, because they might have planned something different, right? So, but a good team who's been really thorough in its preparation and really understands its values and its behaviours and keeping people accountable, I think the more you do, you get that right off the field or off the court. When you do get into that chaotic moment, how you react is how you've prepared, right? And this is what I often say to people, is that your reactions under pressure are what you practice day in, day out when you're not under pressure. So if this is a very straightforward example from my sport. If you finish a drill when someone drops the ball, you're practicing dropping the ball at the end of the drill.
Yeah.
If you're not allowed to step in netball, right? So if you finish a drill and you walk over and you've got the ball in your hand and you're walking with the ball, you're practicing breaking the rules, breaking of the sport, right? So I used to hammer it into my teams, and I still do it with my under 13s girls that I coach, is that we don't practice bad habits, because what you allow yourself to slip into in training, the moment you're under pressure, that's exactly what you will slip into in a game. If you make yourself complete the drill properly, don't allow yourself to step or to throw a bad pass or to drop the ball or whatever the mistake is in training, then that won't happen in a game. And so what you produce under pressure is what you have practiced all year long. So, there are moments of chaos, but business is more chaotic than sport. But I think the baseline is true, that if every day you walk into the office and you practice good habits, when the shit hits the fan or when something blows up or when there's something chaotic happens in your business, you'll revert to what you've done day after day. And if you have got into the habit of practicing good habits, having good corporate health through the times when things aren't so chaotic, you will slip into good habits under pressure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can't remember the name of the player, but I remember reading about a receiver in American football, right? And a veteran, and a new quarterback came to the team, and every time the quarterback threw him the ball in drills at training, this receiver would run the length of the field into the end zone and spike the ball. And the quarterback would say, why do you do that every time? He goes, because every time I get the ball, I make a touchdown. And he's practicing in training the muscle memory of what's going to happen in the game. And it's interesting. Yep. I was talking to another kind of great Australian sporting person, Rick Charlesworth, who, a hockey legend, and also a very successful coach at Olympic level. And he said, everyone's got a plan until the opposition take the field, and your job is to create as much chaos for the opposition as possible. And it's all about preparation. So I asked him once, what was the difference between business leadership and sport leadership? He said, in sport, we train harder than the game. You know, we do more work in training, so the game becomes the most fun thing to do. But in business, we barely train. So in business, if we've barely trained the routines and the baseline prep, and then chaos hits, things must fall apart.
Yep.
Because we haven't trained for it. So how often in business do leaders prepare their team for when conflict arises? Like, how do we have that conversation in an organization? And if we've never prepared for it, when it happens, chaos reigns supreme.
Yep.
What do you think a leader's real responsibility is to equip the team? So I have a theory about chaos. I think all progress is on the far side of chaos. To get to progress, we've actually got to go through chaos. And chaos is simply, we don't know what the patterns are. There are patterns there, but we don't know what they are yet. In our comfort zone, on the near side of chaos, we know exactly what's going to happen. Chaos, we don't know what the patterns are. We have to discover them. But when we do, we'll have progress on the far side of chaos. So the leader has to knowingly lead everybody into chaos. You're leading Netball Australia at the moment. And to make progress, there's going to be an element of this where you've got to lead them into chaos. Right?
Yes.
Well, okay, I know that laugh probably implies something, right? But so what's the leader? What is the leadership role, and what are some of the leadership traits to be able to lead people into chaos? When you know you have to lead them into chaos. It's kind of an interesting thing.
It is. I think the first thing is to be calm. I think if you let your team know that chaos is okay, like chaos is fine, right? But chaos is not good if we're panicking and we let our lizard brains take over. Then that's not good. Like, it's really hard to learn from that. But if you accept that there's going to be chaos, and I don't know about leading your team into it, but you allow the team, like you allow the company or your board or your team to take a direction that you know that there will be chaos, but you're trying to make sure that you get the change that you need. I think it's the leader has to be almost the calmest person in the room, even when things don't look good. You've got to be calm. And I had this coach, Jill McIntosh, and she used to sit on the sideline. And if you go, there's a game, it's one of the most famous World Cup finals in netball history. We were 6 goals down against New Zealand. It's the 1999 World Cup. We're 6 goals down against New Zealand at three-quarter time. And we won by a goal literally on the buzzer. And when you watch Jill, she sits through that last 15 minutes like this, right? Arms folded. And you watch the Silver Ferns coach, Yvonne Willering, super passionate, like up out of a seat, yelling. And I had a conversation with Jill afterwards, and she said that she used to be like that, like up and out and yelling. And then she had a player say to her once, I feel anxious when you're like that, because I feel like you're not in control. So she made it a thing to sit on the sideline. And once she'd given us our instructions and she'd sent us out, she knew it was up to us. So she would just sit back and watch. And no matter what she felt inside, she retained that calm exterior. And I think that's good leadership. But then there are teams who would want the coach to be up and about. But we were older and more experienced, and we knew what we were doing. So she trusted us to do our job, and her job was to be calm on the sideline, right? So I think there's an element of calmness that every leader needs.
What were you feeling when you looked over to the sideline and she's sitting there almost relaxed, arms crossed, and you still haven't won the game yet?
No, I just, it makes you think, oh, it's going to be okay because she's okay. Your leader's okay. It's going to be fine.
I coined this term quite some time ago, that I think the great leaders are powerfully calm. And, the trait that I think leaders need to have to lead people into chaos is to create safety. People will go into chaos if they feel safe. And that safety comes from the degree of courage they perceive from their leader. And calm and courage go hand in hand. When someone sees a leader who's calm, they have a sense of they've got this. And so let's go for it.
Yeah.
We've got nothing to lose. Let's go for this thing.
Yeah.
It's quite a fascinating story, that comparison. I mean, once again, sport, you've got two coaches on the side. And I wonder if that up and out of your chair, jumping and everything else starts to create anxiety in the team.
Yeah, I don't know, right?
Hanging.
Because then you look at someone like Craig Bellamy from the Melbourne Storm, who is famously, famously shouty and irascible in the coach's box. But maybe he's far enough away that the players
Yeah,
sort
don't
of
see
don't
it.
get immediate effect. But when it's courtside, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for being super calm, no matter what's going on the inside. And I think the safety part's really important too, because you don't want people in chaos to be scared of making mistakes,
Yeah,
because then they're just trying to batten down the hatches and wait for the storm to pass rather than actually trying to work through the storm or through the chaos. So I think you've got to create that sense of safety that, if you're taking a risk or if you're doing something different and it's calculated, then as the leader, I'm your safety, right? So
yeah,
I'm not going to put up with it if you're doing rash things or stupid things. But if you're thinking about things and you're measured and you know what you're doing, then you do need to provide that sense of safety.
sure. If I know you've done the preparation, I know the risk was calculated and it's worth it. It could help us win,
Hmm.
and you did your best to execute it, knowing that sometimes we make mistakes. If a leader positions like that, that's all anyone needs from a leader in order to follow them,
Hmm.
and then step up when it's their time. So let's talk about. Um, I've got a question I want to ask about leverage in a minute, but just while we're in the middle of this, let's kind of take the focus off leadership for a second and talk about teammates and teams. So you're in this final, 1999, right? One of the most famous games. I can only imagine what that must have been like for everybody but the players. And the players are in the middle of this, right? Right in the center. Let's talk about team, where leadership isn't so obvious anymore. The coach is on the side. Sure, there's a captain, but actually we're a team now. And what's the best you see in teams in those moments where, like, what's your definition of a high performing team in those moments where we're all a leader here and
Hmm.
we've all got to do our thing? I'd love to get your perspective on team in the middle of that intensity.
Yeah, the thing that really sort of stands out to me when I think back to that moment is the trust. We talked about trust as a value, and it's the trust that you have in your teammates that they will do their job. So in those sort of moments, you can't afford to be second guessing whether someone's going to do their job and trying to cover for them, because then you're not doing your job properly. And in
Yeah.
that moment, there's seven of us on court, and we've got seven opposition, and netball is one of those sports that, like, one person can't dominate, right? We are one of the true team sports because everyone's got their own role to play in their own position on the court. And I could be the greatest athlete of all time, but I can't play goalkeeper and go and score goals, or you can't play centre and be under the post, right? So because of that, we had to you just have to trust that the person next to you is going to do their job, which means that you can concentrate on doing your job. And I think that trust is so important. And you don't get that trust just by saying, I trust you. You get that trust from seeing how hard the person works who's next to you all the way through your preseason and your
Mm,
lead up and all that sort of stuff. So, and this is why I say about in the moment or in the chaos, if you're reverting to what you practiced, and if you have practiced through the year trusting your teammates to do their job and then seeing that, oh yeah, they are doing their job, you're trusting them to do their home training, and then they turn up and they're fit, you go, oh yeah, they are. So that means in the moment you automatically just click into trust mode because you know that they're doing their job. And the other thing that is really important is the game plan. And when it's all chaotic and you're all in that moment, you need to have a really clear game plan that you're all working to. So there's got to be a strategy that has been well thought through, that has been spoken about, that everyone has bought into and everyone understands. And, like, you can have trust, but everything hangs off a really clear game plan.
mm. That's interesting that, trust. And netball's a sport, obviously, where you're physically not allowed into certain parts of the court based on your position, which is why it's this true team sport, right? You can't
Yep.
run the whole court and do amazing things. So it's It's interesting, this perspective that trust is forged by what your teammates are doing in the moments that are not public and are not rewarded. So,
Very much so.
the prep is never rewarded. The reward happens in the game. So did you see your teammates giving it their best, to develop and improve in the moments that are not rewarded and are not publicly seen? And that translation to the workplace is kind of interesting. It would be interesting to have this same conversation about really high performing work teams, not production teams on stage for a theatrical performance. That's much like sport, but where that environment doesn't have the structure of training, training, training and game, or rehearse, rehearse, rehearse and performance, but day in, day out, it's the same grind almost.
Mm-hmm.
Do we trust the people around us to actually deliver against that? And trust is attached to capability.
Yeah.
And commitment.
And trust is also attached a little bit to failure, because I think you've got to trust that your teammates have resilience, and that if something goes wrong, they'll get up and get going again. And when I think back to that team, we actually lost a series before we went into that World Cup against Australia A, which is like the team, all the players that didn't make the World Cup
You're
team.
not supposed to lose that one.
No, right. You're not supposed to lose it. But we're playing against players who really had a point to prove. And we were all thinking about the World Cup. And we had to go through a period of sort of self-reflection about how that happened, why it happened. And so sometimes the failure is the thing that builds trust, because it forces you to be honest with your teammates. And if you're always successful and everything's easy, you don't really build the trust, because you don't see your teammates at their most vulnerable. So failure, I think, has a really important role to play as well.
Absolutely. And it's not viewed like that necessarily always by people. It's invariably viewed as a bad thing, but it's where the lessons are learnt. The lessons are seldom learnt in the win. You're off celebrating, but they're always learnt in the loss, if you like. And what do we do with that? I'd love to explore leverage a little bit with you. It's a word that's used a lot, but possibility and opportunity is sometimes and often a function of taking advantage of leverage that might have just presented itself. I mean, we can consciously craft leverage, but I often see great leaders somehow just seem to know when to grab an opportunity. There's something that comes along, whether it's a circumstance or an individual or whatever. As you think through all the things you've been involved in, where have you found your greatest points of leverage that you might not have consciously actually set out to find, but you just found leverage? Has it been through people? Was it through circumstances? Was it actually just through you and something you did? I know it's a kind of a vague question, but I really want to explore this idea of leverage.
Yeah. What do you mean by leverage?
Well, you get a greater outcome than people could have potentially predicted that you might have been able to achieve.
Yeah. So I think where I leverage the best is in relationships. So I've always been curious about other people. I've always been able to walk into a room and find someone to have a conversation with. And sometimes those conversations are a way to fill an hour at a function or a party or whatever. And then sometimes those conversations lead to really interesting things. And I think, where I've been able to turn something into something bigger has been through, and I don't want to say networking, because I think networking is a bit transactional. I feel like I'm quite well networked, but I haven't set out to network. I've set out to meet people. And that's probably, when I was playing, we always had to go to functions, and, sometimes you would have trained and you would have had 2 training sessions in the day, and all you want to do is go home and lay in your bed and order room service. And we were told, right, gussy up, put your walkout uniform on and your high heels, and we're off to a function, right? So we'd be told that, and some of the girls would, and fair enough, they'd whinge and they'd just find a corner to sit in. And whereas I was always a bit like, meh, if I'm going to be here, I might as well go and meet somebody and have an interesting conversation. So I've always been really curious and always been able to speak to people. And when I was younger, I made the mistake of thinking that having a conversation was telling people about myself. But I think the best conversations you have are when you lean into the person you're talking to and asking them questions. And sometimes people don't want to tell you straight up, like, all their skills. But if you can be curious, you find out what people's skills and strengths and passions are. And I think that's probably where, again, I don't set out to network or to leverage the conversations, but that's where my leverage is, I think, in relationships and contacts. And it's probably the thing that I can bring to my role now as the chair of the Netball Australia Board is to bring in people who are highly skilled in their fields, to assist the board where we need to, or to, provide perspective or information. So, yeah, I think my leverage is in my relationships. And, I'm been really quite clear in saying this since I came into the job, is that I have really good relationships all through the sport, and I've got really great relationships outside the sport, and I'm going to lean on those relationships to get to where we need to get to.
I mean, actually, you've highlighted a thought for me that I had not thought about with leverage, which is the idea of natural leverage. Where do you naturally leverage yourself? And it's in relationships. You've also made a statement that I never thought I'd hear on a podcast, which is gussy up, put your high heels on and your walkout uniform and let's go. I just never ever thought I'd ever hear that in a podcast interview.
Oh, there you go.
That's, it's the other side of sport that people
Yeah,
aren't
it is. And you know what? I don't think the young people today know what gussy up is, so they can all go and Google it.
Gussy up, put your high heels on and your walkout uniform. Liz, let's talk about young leaders for a moment, right? And draw on your sporting life, your media life, your corporate life, your board life. If you were giving a mid-20-year-old, just not advice, not telling them what to do, but you're sharing the best wisdom from your life in the spotlight, which is really, I mean, you've had to do this in the spotlight. I can remember when, your appointment to the board of Netball Australia was made, that came with a lot of expectation publicly, right? So you've lived this in the spotlight. What sort of things would you be saying to that mid-20-year-old who they're going to be a great leader and they're going to do something pretty great, but you really want them to get a nugget or a few nuggets of wisdom from you? What would you share with them?
I want them to think about their why. Why do you want to be a leader? Like, leadership is attractive because it often means you get paid more money and you get more social cachet and you get more influence, and there's lots of things that you get. But if your why is around that sort of stuff, who's going to want to follow you?
Yeah.
Who thinks that's great, right? If your why is about your team, or is about improving the culture of your business, or improving your teammates, or if your why is much broader and much more focused on the people around you, you'll be a much better leader. So I think I would say really spend some time understanding your why, and find a mentor perhaps, or a coach who can help you do that as well. I think when I think back to when I was in my mid-20s, my why was quite selfish around leadership. I thought, I could do all the media interviews and get all the sponsorships, but I mean, my teammates didn't want it, and they weren't interested. Then, as I started to get very clear on my why, which was about helping the people around me be better leaders, making sure the team was in a really good space and was set up for success, really wanting to create a sense of succession around the leadership, I was a far more successful leader because people bought into that, because it was about them, right? And I think if your leadership is about the people around you, you'll be far more effective than if it's about you.
Fantastic. So let's do some quick questions. If you hadn't been an icon of Australian netball or a lawyer, when you're that girl in school, did you have something you thought you wanted to be when you grew up?
When I was in primary school, I wanted to be an astronomer. I used to love looking at the stars and reading about the stars, and I still devour everything that I can about the universe and space and physics and all that sort of thing. So that was sort of where my natural inclination lay. So I don't know, maybe I might have pursued that. I think I've always been a bit of a daydreamer. So looking up at the stars and dreaming, they sort of go
Yeah.
together.
Well, physics is an interesting thing. I love physics. My youngest daughter does as well. But you can be um, you know, a lover of physics and become the lead guitarist of Queen. So everything's possible,
This
right?
is true.
For everybody. What about if you could have solved one of the great problems in the world that's already been solved, like you could have invented something but significant, what would you have loved to have been the inventor of?
Oh my goodness, that's
Tough question.
I know that's just blown my brain actually. Goodness me. What would I have liked to invent?
Or discovered.
Like I love the idea of it's sort of a bit sciencey, but my dad loved science, so I used to read a lot about it.
Mm.
Um, Maybe like something like, researching and discovering how to sequence DNA or something like that. Because can you
Yeah.
imagine getting up every day and going into your lab and like really being driven by this purpose of, I want to understand what life is built on,
For
and
years.
for
Doing it
years,
for
right?
years.
And now it can be done like that, right?
Yeah.
I did a show called Who Do You Think You Are? And I did a DNA test, and it blew me away to think that when I was a little girl, you'd read about people going in and like trying to sequence all the genes for decades, and now you just scrape the inside of your cheek and put it in an envelope and send it off, and they put it in a machine and it's done for you. Like,
Yeah.
how amazing is that? I don't think
It's
I've got the patience to do something like that. But the other thing, that I now see, now you got me thinking about it. I love history. And I love, like, my degree, my arts degree, I majored in Roman political history, but I would have loved to have sort of, been around, that age of discovery where they're all heading off, and often, sadly, a lot of the people who were doing this plundered from the ancient world, but like uncovering something amazing with just like a little brushing away, again, doing something really tiny for years and years and years, and then trying to piece it all together would be amazing.
So you've just hinted at what my third question was going to be before we wrap up, which was if you could have gone back to any period in time, where would it be and why? And I think you've kind of given us the hint on that.
Yeah, I would have gone back to, the Roman Empire, but just as it was turning into, going from Republican Rome into that Roman Empire. I think it would have been fascinating to
Oh
see,
yeah,
how someone like, first Julius Caesar and then his heir Augustus, how do they turn the tide? And I think we see it now, like with American politics, the things that
yeah,
we see Donald Trump do that would have been enough to get you nowhere near being elected, 50 years ago. No one even bats an eyelid, right? And when you start to read about the change in Rome from being really staunchly the Roman Republic to being, in the thrall of first Augustus, who said he was the first amongst equals, the Princeps Senatus, and then then the emperors that come after him are truly emperors. It would have been fascinating to live through that. Mind you, particularly tough to be a woman in that period of time. So I
yeah.
don't know that I would have gone back as a Roman woman. I wouldn't have minded going back as a bloke.
Interesting. So, Liz, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And for people listening, my challenge is simple. Liz has kind of painted a journey of leadership across multiple domains of performance over many years. And the challenge is simple. How do we become greater leaders of contribution? How do we have a much more powerful sense of purpose that drives us? How do we build team through a solid and baseline set of values? How do we lead people into chaos in a way that allows them to feel safe and lean on the courage of the leader and the calmness of the leader? All of that's required for us to make changes in the world that we need, because the world constantly needs us to keep getting better and holding the line in terms of what great contribution looks like. So my challenge to everybody in business is to learn from the lessons of sport, and maybe those that are in sport learn from the lessons of the chaos and the day-to-day that is business, so that we keep improving. Liz, thank you so much for giving us so much time in what is a busy life right now. I know, I really appreciate it. And I just look forward to the next time you and I get to chat about things. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Simon. I've loved it. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.